Hello. Actually, the first thing I'd like to say is just welcome everyone. It's wonderful that so many of you have turned up to hear us. That's really nice of you. Hello, Pippa. And it's also just really nice to be back in real life. I'm sure everyone's said that so far today, but yeah, it's for us, it's been really energizing to see so many faces. Hello, Stacey, and to see people in real life again, so thank you very much. I am delighted to be joined by two wonderful speakers today. The fabulous...
Like I'm interrupting a reunion.
I know. Well, there's so much love in the room. The wonderful Lee McNamara from DFS, who leads the internal comms and culture at DFS. And then our very own Kathy Abernethy. Kathy is the Director of Menopause Services for us at Peppy, and prior to joining us, she was the chair of the British Menopause Society, so knows more about menopause than the average person. My name is Max Landry. I'm one of the co-founders of Peppy. For those of you that don't know, Peppy is a company that provides various types of support. We support people going through the menopause, people going through a fertility journey, people becoming a new parent. I became a new parent 2 weeks ago, so if I'm looking a bit ragged, that's why. I'm more tired than normal. And then as of next month, we will be launching our men's health service, which is there to support men like me. So what we're here to discuss specifically today really is how providing personalized support and gender-specific support is a really powerful thing for you to do in your organization. And I think, first of all, I'm going to hand over to Lee. So I'd like to ask you, Lee, really kind of historically speaking, benefits have been delivered in organizations with very much a kind of one-size-fits-all approach. We believe that it's time to do something different. So it would be really interesting to hear why DFS is leading the way with this, and why have you done this now?
Yeah, so we actually came to working with kind of the well-being side of things through work we were doing around inclusion. We found that well-being more and more is actually one of the biggest unlockers for us to create a more diverse workforce. Because you probably know us, have a never-ending sale, all that kind of thing. So we sell sofas, we deliver sofas, but we also make sofas as well, so we're vertically integrated. What that brings with it is a host of kind of systemic issues. So, for example, we are male-dominated because manufacturing's male-dominated, logistics are male-dominated. But actually what we found was that most sofa purchases are either made by or heavily influenced by women. And we also found that our sofas were dominated by, our showrooms were dominated by men, right? So what we were trying to do is kind of work out how we can kind of play our part logistically and from a manufacturing point of view, but also make sure that when you walk into one of our showrooms, you're greeted by people that look a little bit more like you. So that's when we started to think about working around well-being and how that can unlock. And one of the things we looked at very seriously was around the menopause. It's the fastest growing demographic of people in the workforce in the UK, so it's really important. It works for us if we can attract more women to come and work for us, especially in our showrooms, because if you get it right, kind of colleagues win, right? Because colleagues win because you're tailoring some lovely support around something that really matters. Our customers win because they get a better experience when they come into the showroom because they're seeing someone that looks like them being mirrored back to them. And from a company point of view, there's bottom line, you're 150% more likely to purchase something from someone who's a bit more like you. So if you go into a showroom that's kind of dominated by women as opposed to men, there's a high likelihood, Max, that you're probably going to buy something from us, which is lovely.
Amazing, thank you.
Pleasure.
So obviously 2 months ago you rolled out menopause support, which was really, I think, a first for a retailer like you. What's that been like?
It's been great. The numbers are exactly where we wanted them to be. So in regards to engagement around kind of it. But I won't lie, just generally societally, we're pretty crap at having these kinds of conversations, particularly around the menopause, right? And
we're getting better. We're getting better, I think.
But we're no different. As I said, kind of walking into a warehouse full of men and going, let's have a chat about the menopause, right? Yeah, you get certain looks and then people quietly shuffle off. That tends to be what happens. But what it is enabling us to do is actually have conversations about it, though. So the sort of what we're doing is just trying to have more and more conversations about this stuff. And practice makes perfect, right? So the more conversations you have, the easier it becomes. And it isn't a sales pitch, but well-being can't be excluding, right? So talking about the menopause is not an excluding thing. It's inclusive, right? Because even if I am not directly impacted by the menopause, because I'm not, I was born a man, big relationships that I have in my life, either with my wife, my mum, my sister, my daughter, what have you, right? I'm going to be impacted that way. And what we loved again about Peppy, as I said, it's not a sales pitch, but it's a transferable benefit. So I can still offer that to my wife if she needs it. Like, that's a lovely thing to do. So it's an inclusive thing.
Thank you very much. Kathy, you, as I've said already, know more about menopause than the average person. But could you explain a bit about why actually giving people personalised support is so important?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the Director of Menopause Services at Peppy, and I talk about menopause all the time. I've been working in menopause clinics. I worked in the NHS. As Max said, I was chair of the British Menopause Society. So for me, talking about menopause is absolutely comfortable. But I'm sure there's some of you are thinking, it's a bit personal, it's a bit taboo, it's a bit of a stigma, don't want to be talking about it at work. But when you look at the number of women that we have in the workplace, the number of women who are experiencing menopause during their working lives, 60% of us now as women will be experiencing menopause as we work. You know, just a generation ago, that was quite different. My mum's generation wasn't really working through the menopause, whereas now we are. So it's becoming increasingly important that we address that topic. And some of you might be thinking, well, what actually happens? I mean, average age is 50, and it's just the end of periods. But actually, it's way more than that, especially if those of you who have experienced menopause, and we won't ask for a show of hands, but for those of you who have, will know that it's much, much more than just the physiological process of periods changing. It's that whole era of symptoms that happens around that time, which can start 10 years sometimes before your periods stop. So the classic flushes, sweats, easy ones to recognise. But did you know you can get memory loss, concentration, self-esteem issues, tiredness, poor sleep, all sorts of things which you don't necessarily, brain fog, always forget that one. You don't necessarily associate with the menopause. And what people say to me, I hear this all the time, is, I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't prepared for it. And it's affecting my work. We know that more than 60% of people will say that it's having a negative impact on them in the workplace. So I have a real passion to enable women to actually get through their menopause transition with confidence and to know the options that are available. And for that, it needs to be personalised.
Thanks, Kathy. I mean, one thing that always just jumps out to me that I obviously am pretty familiar with these stats because we bang on about them all the time. But when you actually look at those numbers and you think what they mean, it's really, really powerful. You know, one in four women will consider leaving their job. So some people, I remember when we first started supporting people with menopause, people were saying this is a sort of niche thing. But when you look at these numbers, you realise this is really something that affects a lot of people. And another question I often used to get sort of asked a lot is, why do you, as a sort of fairly youngish guy, care about this? And my answer was always, well, I've got a mum, I've got a sister, I've got a wife, I've now got 2 daughters, I work with loads of women. And when you start to sort of think about it like that, you realise this is very normal to be having these kind of discussions. Lee, I'm going to come back to you. Now, one thing that has always been a kind of challenge for, I think, across all benefits and in most companies is people offer lots of different types of support, but often the uptake is basically really low and people don't use the services that people are providing. What are you guys doing to try and drive uptake and to try and sort of create a culture where people actually use what you offer?
Yeah, I guess it's about using the platform, and in Peppy's case, as a launchpad to have good conversations, isn't it? So, World Menopause Day is coming up on the 18th of October. By the way, if you'd have asked me 12 months ago, wouldn't have known that, but it's coming up on the 18th of October. So it's how you can use the platforms that you're providing to your colleagues to have good conversations about things. So later this month, or in fact today, I think, there's a lady in the audience called Sarah Hay who actually does all the work. She's sitting over there. So we just launched our Menopause Guidelines internally for all of our colleagues and line managers. So it's about the stuff that kind of wraps around it. That's where you start to get good conversations and that cultural shift, really.
Amazing. One thing I'm really conscious of is apparently every talk today has overrun and there's been no time for questions. So if anyone does have a question, do feel free to just sort of put up a hand midway through, and then at least that way we will actually answer the questions. One of the things we're going to be launching soon is our men's health service. So I'm going to just share some stats with you. This one just kind of says it all. And actually, we haven't kind of announced this yet, but when we started just talking to some of our companies we're close to, like Lee at DFS, Lee actually said, we're going to launch this immediately before the official launches actually happen. So it'd be really interesting to hear, what has been the sort of, what's been driving you to say we need to support men in this way? We've had a lot of talk about the need to provide support for women and menopause most obviously, but what's driven the sort of desire for you to do something for men's health, other than this pretty dire stat?
Need I say more?
Yeah, I know.
I guess before we did anything, we listened to colleagues, what they cared about, what they needed, what they wanted, and you kind of respond accordingly to that kind of conversation, I guess. As I said, we're vertically integrated, which means we're not massively out of kilter, but there are more men that work in our business than women. So it would be irresponsible of us not to react to some of the very, very real issues that men face from a health point of view. And again, facing into the fact that society at large, men are really rubbish at seeking out support. So we were thinking, how can we help those that are in need most, but have a propensity to seek it out the least, right? Because asking for help means putting yourself in a vulnerable position, doesn't it? Kind of, I need help. You need to be in a position where you feel confident enough to do that. It's easier to do it if you're connecting people who need help directly with the people that can provide help and getting out of the way of that. So it's less of a barrier to being vulnerable and requesting help, which again, the digitization of that support, which is offered, is a really lovely way to kind of get that democratized well-being out to lots of people at the same time, particularly men, because we've got to get better at it. And just the same way as we are doing with the menopause, we're going to start having better conversations with the men's health piece around male-specific cancers, mental health issues, the things that really, really impact a very high proportion of the demographic of colleagues that work in our business.
Thank you. One thing I've really certainly noticed as a man, when I contrast my sort of healthcare experience with my wife's healthcare experience, most women will in their 20s be engaging with the doctor a lot, whether that's to get contraception, to have various tests that happen. If a woman's had a baby, she's obviously really engaged in serious healthcare and in an obvious way. And what's interesting about being a man is often you kind of go from being a child where you get taken for your vaccinations and then nothing happens for the next 30 years, and we just sort of get out of practice of engaging with our health, which is not ideal as the stats show. But I think often what we see innovations from people that don't necessarily work in health. I'd like to sort of bring you in, Kathy, as a clinician to make some predictions, and we won't hold you to any of these. But what do you think is the sort of future of wellbeing support? What are the kind of core pillars that people should be looking at?
Well, listening to what people tell me all the time, both in clinics and at Peppy as well, is that they want personal support. You can give them statistics, you can send them to websites, you can do all those things. But actually, what people want is what can I do? And what does that mean for me? And how can I manage my work? So I think it has to be personalised, tailored to them at the time that they are in their life.
Thank you very much. And then I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to ask you, Lee, obviously different organisations are at different stages in their kind of journeys to basically trying to provide great support for their staff. So what are the kind of basic steps you think? If someone's coming and looking at these issues from afresh and doesn't know where to start, where should they start?
Yeah, it's asking the questions of the people that work in your business. It's kind of listening first, understanding what they're facing and what kind of support they want, and then tailoring it around that. So kind of, if you've got predominantly workforce of A, there's no point in launching something that won't appeal to those colleagues or make a real difference. So start with understanding, start with listening first, and absolutely tailor it as specifically as you can.
Amazing. Kathy, do you have anything to add to that?
All I can say is that your staff will be so grateful if they have personalised support. We just hear it all the time. I mean, I hear the user feedback that we get, and I listen to people, and time again they say things like, you've given me my life back, you've given me my work back, and I can see a way forward now that I hadn't been able to before.
That
Amazing.
warm, fuzzy feeling you get from
Yeah.
helping people.
I mean, we had a bit of user feedback the other day that I'll share because it nearly sort of made me cry. It was with a woman from Santander who kind of wrote to us and said, I've been struggling for about 10 years and I got help in the last 3 months, and last night my daughter said to me, finally I've got my mum back. And I was sort of welling up when I was reading this.
And I never get tired of hearing that, never.
No, it's always nice to hear. Does I've no idea what the time is. Does anyone have any questions?
I've got a couple of questions.
Oh, okay. Will you start?
Has the mic on? Yep. Okay, so I think you just covered one of the first ones, but I think something that's interesting is how are the workplace and facilities changing to support menopause? So what are the sort of things that workplaces are doing to help with this?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in menopause for a long time, and I can remember just 5 years ago, there'd have been hardly anything in the workplace. But we're now seeing menopause cafes, we're seeing peer support groups, women's networks, and it has been until recently a women's issue, and I think we are progressing beyond now for people to understand that actually it's an everybody issue. Because if you're working with people going through menopause or you're living with them, then you're going to be impacted by it. And we think about that figure that was up just a minute ago. 1 in 4 think about leaving their job. And workplaces are now switching on to that and thinking, actually, we want to retain these staff.
And I think actually leading on from that, there was another question here about what's the uptake in men wanting that awareness? So from your point of view, Lee, is there much interest and how's that going?
There's more acceptance of having conversations about men's health with men than there is about having conversations about the menopause. That's the first thing. The door's slightly more open. There's a huge interest there, but there's also a huge gap there as well, particularly around, just as there was 5 years ago, around knowledge around the menopause. We've got a lot of work to do around helping educate and raise awareness around some of these specific issues, which is why having a benefit and a reason to talk about them is a great platform to have in any business, I think.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're pretty much at time, but I think most of us women in here will agree that these are the right conversations to be having. And I just wanted to thank you all for coming this afternoon.
Thank you very much.